Let's code this bad boy. Back to Maven's Mate. I'm going to make this an after trigger. This is because I know we'll use the new opportunities ID later when we create our comparable junction object. In a before insert trigger, the ID wouldn't yet exist. Then we have the customary trigger loop. And again, I begin with comments on my high level plan. Step 1, search for comparable ops. Step 2, create a junction object for each comparable op. Let's start with our SOQL query that'll search for comparable ops. I'm adding in the criteria for a comparable op onto the top right of your screen so we don't forget. We'll store our results in a list of opportunities called comparable ops. For our SOQL query, I'll just pull the ID field for now until I know we need more. It's the where clause of this SOQL query where all the juicy stuff happens. The first requirement is that the comparable op amount needs to be within 10% of our base opportunities amount. We're going to need two bind variables for this, one for the upper bound of our amount and one for the lower bound of our amount. I'd love to do this math directly in the SOQL query, but we'd get syntax errors. So I take a step back and prepare these variables before our SOQL query. We'll have two decimal variables, max amount and min amount, and I'll do their calculations directly here. Back to our SOQL query, we simply now include our new bind variables in the where clause. I was tempted to use or instead of and, but after thinking about it for a moment, and is definitely right. A lot of the errors that occur in SOQL queries will be around your use of and ors. It's really easy to get them confused. Keep that in mind so you know where to double check in the future. Next requirement, both opportunities, accounts, industries need to match. I add another and clause and set the two equal to each other, but I can immediately tell this won't work. Try to guess why. I'll tell you, it's because the industry field on our bind variable is not in trigger.news memory. It's not a base field on our opportunity, so we need to query it first. That does not apply to the other side of the equation, however, because technically SOQL is querying that for us. It's part of the SOQL query. It's not an outsider like this bind variable. Anyway, so we need to query the account industry from our op. SOQL to the rescue. We'll do another SOQL query beforehand. This time, I save it in a single opportunity record I'll call op with account info. This SOQL query includes the ID field, and more importantly, the account.industry field. I filter it down to just our base opportunity, then add a limit 1 for good measure. This may seem kind of weird right now. We have two variables that represent the exact same opportunity, but technically the two variables are different. The op variable includes everything in trigger.news memory. The op with account info variable has only our opportunity ID and the account industry. While theoretically, this might seem like we're creating a parallel universe in our code, technically this is perfectly sound. If we need to use our ops base fields, we use the op variable. If we need to access our account industry, we use the other variable. Now that we have our account industry stored in the op with account info variable, I'll include it as a bind variable in our main SOQL query. Don't forget, we need to use dot notation to get the exact field we want to compare here. Now on to the last requirement. The op needs to be closed won in the past year. This is actually two requirements in one. I'll add one filter for the closed won portion, and I'll add another filter for the date range portion. Earlier on in this course, I mentioned SOQL has certain date shortcuts we can use. This is one of them. It says the close date needs to be greater or equal to the last 365 days. I could replace 365 with any number here. Alternatively, I could have also prepared a date variable beforehand that was set to op.closedate.addDays -365. But what I did here is more efficient. One more clause we'll add to this SOQL query. Technically, our base opportunity could be included in the results, and we'd be comparing our opportunity with itself. To prevent this, I add a clause that excludes our opportunity ID. There we have it. Our SOQL query is good to go. Adding in a debug statement for good measure. By the way, Apex will automatically parse this into a string version of our list. Cool shortcut. In the second half of our trigger, we need to create the comparable junction object. The way junction objects work, we need a separate record for each comparable opportunities we found. So we'll loop through each of our comparable opportunities, then create our junction record each time. Whoever designed the data model for our junction object did a really good job, because all we need to do is populate the base and comparable opportunity fields. Then the rest of the fields on our junction object are automatically calculated using formula fields. I'll populate these fields, then insert our comparable record. In a previous course, I mentioned you can also do DML on lists instead of single records. This is more efficient from a technical perspective since each DML statement runs all the triggers and workflows and other automation on that object. So if we're creating 10 comparable records separately, we're rerunning any automation on this object 10 times. But if we do a DML once on a list of 10 comparable records instead, we save ourselves from rerunning automation needlessly. The fix for this is easy. I create a list ahead of time, add each comparable into our list within the loop, then insert our list after the loop is done. I'll go into more detail on this and other scaling topics in the next course. But for now, our trigger is ready to test.